Our next guest is a lady really for those who are true Bath people, as it were, homebred, she doesn't need an introduction. Margaret Heffernan is someone that has incredible weight and stature in the area of leadership. Her plaudits keep going on, let alone her hits on YouTube channels and various platforms. She is a lady that is asked for, desired for, and speaks into the lives of senior leaders all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have an incredible time as Margaret Heffernan talks about leadership and about being imaginative in our modern day. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Margaret Heffernan.
Very much. It's really great to be back in this beautiful building. And it's great getting together. It's great getting together with like-minded people, especially because, you don't need me to tell you, everyone's very uncertain these days. They're uncertain where their business is going, they're uncertain where their career is going, they're uncertain about, which country is going to go to war tomorrow. It's a very tough environment in which to be making decisions. And it's very easy to get distracted by all the news headlines. I know everybody does. We promise we won't look, and then we do look. And it's very easy not to think about, but what's going on really? What explains this incredible, apparently intense aspect of uncertainty? And I think it goes back to something I wrote about in my previous book, which is that these days, what the students of forecasting will say, or the experts in forecasting will say, is that if you frame very precise forecasts and you keep them up to date with new information and you assign probabilities to them and you understand probability, which many mathematicians tell me they don't, if you do all of that and you keep updating the forecast and you run your business that way, then probably the furthest out you can see with any degree of certainty is 400 days. If you're not quite that rigorous, and frankly, most companies and most people aren't, then it's much closer to 150 days. This is a sea change. It means that the way that we're used to operating and the way that we're used to running businesses is operating on a model that no longer holds true. We used to manage as forecast, manage, execute. We called it management. We did it with quite a lot of control. And what we're discovering is a lot of that control has gone. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know if our ever so fragile supply chains are going to break or not because of some international incident. We're mired in ineradicable uncertainty. And I think it puts us in a really tricky transition because I think we're mostly running our companies still on what I think of as 20th century management, which is forecast, plan, execute, or aim always for efficiency, when actually what the 21st century requires is a lot more looseness, a lot of recognition of uncertainty, a lot of margin for surprises, and an incredible need to innovate ahead of need. In this environment, leadership is not about doing what we do exceptionally well. It's about thinking ahead all the time. What is the future going to need of us? What are the pressures on us that we might get ahead of? That's what leadership is. It is about being ahead, not following, but being ahead, not waiting, but being ahead. And this is very different from what most of us have ever done before. It's very different from what most of us have been taught before. It means, I think, that leadership must be fundamentally an imaginative act. Decisions have to be based not so much on planning as on preparedness for a future that we can't entirely see, but we have to be ready for. Now, that all makes perfect sense in the abstract. The reality is, when you start thinking about how most companies work, it's really difficult. And so you have to start asking the question, well, does anybody know how to do this? You know, could I go visit a company? Is there a country somewhere that's really good at this stuff? I don't know. Is there? So I've been talking to a lot of historians over the last couple of years, and what they say to me is that, you know, when things really start to shift, the very first signals will be found in the arts. Whenever you want to see when a culture or a society is changing, that's where the early warning signs will be. And I know from my own career, making radio and television programs, making films, working in technology startups in the US, that all of these extremely creative industries, the thing they're famous for is for being ahead of their times. That actually, one of the things I noticed when I was working in television was how was it certain shows just seemed to come out at exactly the right time, when the production cycle time could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years. How did they manage to do that? How did they know 4 years ahead of time that that was exactly what we were going to want to see? So I've become extremely interested in how artists work, because I think they give us some clues to how we need to work now. And there are certainly some patterns, I think, that we can take from this. So how do artists spend most of their day if they don't have a project on? Well, mostly they do what sociologists call deep hanging out. Sounds like fun, sounds a bit of a skive, actually, but it isn't. It's about being in the world, it's about wandering around, looking around, listening to people's conversations on trains, something I do quite a lot of. It means paying attention to kind of what's the feel out there? What's the mood? What are people talking about? What are the colors they're most likely to be wearing? Are they reading anymore? Is everybody on the tube on their phone? Who isn't? Why not? What's going on out there? The television writer, Jed Mercurio, scopes out time in his week, every week, to do this. Even if he's got a show on, even if he's in the middle of writing something, it's like what he calls, you know, he thinks of it as horizon scanning. He's kind of trying to pick up through his cultural radar what's going on out there all the time. The jazz musician, Suitu Kint, says he spends a lot of time just wandering around and listening to sounds, different kinds of engines, cars, background noise, the sound of people's lives. Jeremy Deller, you know, just ran this phenomenal event in Bradford for the City of Culture, says he will meet with almost anyone that wants to meet with him, because he's not a painter, he's not a sculptor, he's not a musician, he's not a writer. He's just somebody who comes up with ideas in the face of all the impressions that he collects. This doesn't look like work, but it is fundamental work. Or as the filmmaker Mike Lee said to me once, fabulous line, I've remembered ever since, you know, nothing happening is something happening. So artists and creative people spend a lot of time just as sponges soaking up where they are and spending time thinking about it. Right? This takes quite a lot of patience, and it takes quite a lot of courage, because you don't know if it's going to add up to anything. So there's an opportunity cost. Sooner or later, a decision has to be made. An idea has to emerge. Eventually, creative people all know this. They trust it. They trust the process, that eventually all these sort of metal filings of observations will coalesce around the magnet of an idea. Now, that's scary too, because it may be a terrible idea. They may actually not know how to do it, but they know that it will come. And they have to make a choice. When they make a choice, it may not be that the idea they're going to focus on is something they know how to do or how to map out. One of the things I discovered, which really shocked me, I mean, I've written 7 books. I think I know about writing. But people like Lee Child or Murakami or Olga Tokarczuk, they start incredibly complex novels, very intricate plots, with no planning. They don't know who's the good guy or the bad. They don't know if the ending is going to be happy or sad. They find it by doing it. This is very, very different from the way most of us have been taught to encounter life. But of course, the excitement that they feel discovering it is the excitement that we feel reading what they produce. It takes courage to begin, and it takes a lot of courage and stamina to keep going. The painter Lubena Hamid once said, anybody who's ever painted a picture knows what an insanely frightening thing it is to do. What we see when the finished product lies on top of hours, days, weeks, months, sometimes years of corrections, changes of heart, different moods, different adjustments, new technologies, all kinds of things. Faith Ringgold, the American painter, said she found doing a new painting so frightening she used to have to pray before she started. I know the feeling. It's a bit how I feel before I start a new book. So this takes a lot of courage. People often dismiss artists as sort of flaky, lazy, kind of impractical. But actually what they spend a huge amount of time doing is starting to make something nobody's ever seen before with no guarantees that they'll succeed and having the stamina to keep going. Qualities I would argue today in leadership are absolutely fundamental. It means that artists in many ways share many characteristics with entrepreneurs. And although we may not all be artists, we can certainly learn to adopt some of their habits and ways of thinking. This whole concept of being out in the world is fundamental to that. I've never known anyone in business have a great idea sitting behind a desk. I've definitely not known anybody to have a great idea staring at a screen or with their phone plugged in. It means being in the world. It means taking risks. It means when the going gets tough, and it always will, if you're trying to do something new and original, that what you need fundamentally is the courage, the stamina, and colleagues who will keep you going. It also means a great capacity for improvisation. I spent some time with wall artists, who just fill their heads with ideas and imagery and observations, and then as fast as you can see it, they'll cover a vast building with a complete picture that seems somehow planned, except it was only ever imagined. And when all of these artists finish their work, they don't really know what it is until or unless they encounter people who've read their book or seen their painting and can tell them, because that's where it exists, where it intersects with the intersection between the person who made it and the person who sees it, internalizes it, remembers it. And then, even if it's been a huge success, what do most artists do? They change. Forget brand new and all this nonsense that tries to turn us into merchandise. They understand that it's in the exploration and invention and discovery that innovation and leadership really lies. So this is a pretty profound challenge to the way that we work today. And it's a deliberate challenge. So I've been really interested in companies and organizations that are trying to find different ways to work. And I'm particularly interested in really traditional ones because I think, well, if they can do it, we can all do it. One of the people who sort of spurred me on in this particular journey was Andy Haldane, who used to be chief economist of the Bank of England. Before he set interest rates, what did he do? Yeah, of course, he looked at all the spreadsheets and all the charts and all that stuff. He would go for very, very long walks in the East End of London, trying to get a sense of what's the mood out there. What are people worried about? What are they talking about? Yeah, inflation is flattened, but prices are still high. What does that mean for people? Different kind of data. There is no data for the future. What he's trying to get is the most live data he can find. And increasingly frustrated that data couldn't show him everything, he started bringing all sorts of artists into the Bank of England. English National Ballet, Jeremy Deller, activists like Doreen Lawrence, wanting to stimulate different conversations, not PowerPoint slides about our positive culture and purpose and well-being, but real conversations about what is it like to be alive in the world today and what can we do about it? And how do we start having these conversations without agendas, not prepackaged, not planned, not managed, so that we start to find in ourselves capability and creativity we did not know that we had before. All of this, of course, flies in the face of performance management systems with their KPIs and their targets and their incentives, the problem with which is not that they don't work, but that they do. Because what all of those kind of technocratic tools are designed for is to keep everybody on the straight and narrow. The problem being that the road isn't straight and narrow anymore. So I take enormous inspiration from artists because I see them making new paths every day. And I also know, and I know the data that says, we're all born creative. All of us, every single one of us. Now, you could ask what happens along the way, right? Because I've had more people than I can count come up and say, I understand what you mean, Margaret, but I'm not creative. And I think, well, what happened? What happened to you? And two things generally happen. One is the education system happened to them, and they became excellent at giving the right answer to the existing questions. That's a skill that has no use anymore. Right? We need better questions to which we don't know the answer, but we have the courage, the persistence, the stamina, and the imagination to go looking for them. We need people with the skills, the knowledge, the curiosity to think for themselves, who aren't afraid of the questions to which they don't know answers. Managing those people requires a different kind of leadership. Being one of those people requires a different kind of leadership. So I think we are at a considerable crossroads. I had spent last night at a dinner in London with 10 CEOs having a conversation about all of this. All of them looked kind of surprisingly excited as they started to remember that they were creative once too. So I don't buy this idea that they can't do it. My fear is that they mostly listen to narratives that say, you can't do it, we're kind of stuffed, stick to the knitting, nothing's really changed. Everything has changed. Everything is changing. Human beings are extremely good at change. We're extremely creative from the moment we're born, and we can stay that way. And we need to stay that way because fortune favors the prepared mind, the mind willing to look out into the future and imagine what the world could be, and then set out to make it. Thank you very much.